carbon tax in contention 1 is oil price stabilization. As a result of reducing oil demand, and Merck in the New York Times explains that a $20 price for a carbon ton would cut oil exports 40%. Ultimately, Eric Toder of the Tax Policy Center finds that when the U.S. government gets serious about the need to reduce dependence on imported oil, carbon-based taxes should be important components of the policy mix. This is beneficial because the U.S. is doing bad business with bad actors. As Rebecca Lefton of the Center for American Progress explains, in 2008, the United States imported oil from 10 countries that have long-term, protracted conditions that make a country dangerous or unstable. Unfortunately, Gerwat of the Institute for Analysis of Global Security explains that dependence on Middle East means further enrichment of the corrupt and dictatorial regimes in the Persian Gulf. It would also necessitate increased Western military presence in the region to ensure access to oil, but such presence would only strengthen the xenophobic and anti-Western sentiments among jihadists and increase their motivation to fight. This vicious cycle can only be broken through a massive political reform that the oil regimes resist. Contention 2 is the green shift. Green energy improves in 2 ways, and the first is by adopting. Benoit of the Center for Inter-University Research and Analysis for Organizations explains that since environmental policy changes the relative price of environmental factors of production, it would be surprising if increased policy stringency did not encourage facilities to identify means of economizing on their use. The Regional Economics Model Institute explains that nationally, wind and solar represent about 5% of 2014 power generation, and by 2040, this grows to 37% in the $10 per ton tax test case. This reduces emissions by displacing dirty energy, as the Asia Pacific Energy Research Center finds that 1% increase in non-fossil fuel electricity generation reduces CO2 emissions per capita from electricity generation by 0.75%. Second is by innovating. The Tax Policy Center states that a carbon tax will stimulate private research on and development of clean energy, accelerating the pace at which new energy sources come online. Indeed, the Columbia University explains that domestic capacity to innovate is key to translating technology to real development and lasting environmental gain. Copenhagen Economics quantifies that a 1 percentage point increase in the tax share of costs induces 2.4 percentage points increase in patent. Ultimately, UC San Diego furthers that a carbon tax reduces fossil innovation by 60%, but increases green innovation by 53%. Eduardo Porter of the New York Times confirms that by providing monetary incentives, a tax would offer by far the most effective way to encourage businesses and individuals to reduce their use of fossil fuels and invest in alternatives. This impact not only goes to the corporations, but it goes to the people as well. The impact of emissions is absolutely critical because by reducing the associated health impacts of emissions, including air pollution in the form of carcinogens and particulate matter, Ian Perry of the IMF finds that a carbon tax would reduce air pollution-related mortality in the United States by 55%, which is crucial because every single year, 200,000 Americans die as a result of air pollution. That means that the IMF finds that a carbon tax would save 110,000 lives annually. And for these reasons, Harrison and I strongly affirm.
Could you see the 110,000 lives? The author of REM.
That's not true.
Okay. Are you ready? Everyone here. Sam and I negate. We observe that in order to make the debate more educational, you ought to prioritize evaluating the effects of the most likely form of a carbon tax rather than some idealized form that is unlikely to pass Congress. Contention 1 is counterproductive trade-offs. Tax analyst Martin Sullivan explains, history teaches us that the passage of a new carbon tax is likely to occur only if the taxes designed and marketed be fended off political objections, including opposition by fuel-intensive industries and rural and suburban regions. Fox's David Roberts furthers, if the taxes of any substantial size, the carbon lobby wants to cut regulations and axe clean energy support programs in exchange. This is a huge problem because, as Roberts explains, they are more effective than a carbon tax, and thus he concludes a carbon tax deal would be a terrible trade for Greens. Contention 2 is economic decline. As Heritage's David Kritzer explains, a carbon tax by raising energy costs forces energy companies to fire workers in order to sustain economic losses. As a result, NERA economist Paul Bernstein finds that a carbon tax would kill 1.5 million jobs immediately. but the effects are more widespread, as the CBO writes. By raising the production cost of using fossil fuels, a carbon tax will also increase the cost for emission-intensive goods and services. This price increase does not, however, change producer or consumer behavior. The University of Sydney's Tim Anderson writes, the demand for carbon-dirty industries is mostly price inelastic, and so the higher costs will be accepted and passed on to consumers without either technological or behavioral change. Spencer quantifies this income loss, finding it amounts to $1,900 per year for a family of four, with impacts falling particularly hard on the poor. CBS's Amy Cucci contextualizes this impact, writing that 63% of Americans say they are unable to handle a $500 cost. The carbon tax simply pushes too many families over the brink. From a macroeconomic perspective, GW lecturer Kevin Gayaratna says even a revenue-neutral carbon tax would reduce U.S. GDP by $2.5 trillion. Robert Murphy of the McDonald Institute finds that the economic consensus is that, on next, even revenue-neutral carbon taxes are harmful. Carlton 73 says even if the money is rebated back to the poor, a carbon tax still decreases incomes by 4%. There are three impacts. First is increased poverty. Forbes Jude Clementi writes, because the poor are uniquely sensitive to energy price fluctuations, a 10% increase in home energy costs puts 840,000 more Americans into poverty. Clementi further, once rich Europe has set the warning for extreme energy and environmental policies. This higher poverty often results in lower health care. Higher home energy bills have resulted in a 24,000 excess deaths in the UK in winter and 7,200 excess in Spain. The second impact is decreased environmentalism. As EPA Administrator William Riley once wrote, a healthy economy pays for our environmental gains because A, it creates the capital to transition to clean technology, and B, it raises people's expectations for the environment. Conversely, a weaker economy decreases support for the environment. As Times Brad Walsh writes, concern for the environment is traditionally the first thing thrown overboard when economic needs get rough. As Stephen Conroy of UC San Diego writes, every 1% increase in unemployment decreases support for environmental policies by 0.6%. The third impact is electoral backlash. As Paul Sagan of Yale observes, a carbon tax would be political suicide if people become angry at a government they believe is harming their economic standing. Well, generally, Business Insider reports that incumbent parties since World War II, when there was a recession, lose the election 100% of the time, meaning that a carbon tax would be a huge blow for candidates who have wrapped their political fortune on the record of progressive politics being a win for workers. However, even if a carbon tax is weakened by carve-outs and loopholes, the backlash would still be massive. For instance, in Australia, even though the carbon tax only covered 0.02% of businesses, Rob Field of the Wall Street Journal writes that voters still blamed it for the broader economic declines and punished pro-green politicians at the ballot box, resulting in the election of the militarily right-wing Tony Abbott. The only solution to climate change then must not come at the expense of the working class. It's going through pro-growth, pro-poor policies like green subsidies, can the green movement avoid the pitfalls that plague other nations' climate policies Sam and I are incredibly proud to oppose.
Is everybody ready?
Yes.
In how many of the 40 countries that a carbon tax exists in have we seen massive drop-offs?
Australia, I would say. I would also add this. The United States is very unique among countries that are considering a carbon tax. Because only the United States has a unique fossil fuel extraction industry where it's a significant part of its
Doesn't Denmark, Finland, Sweden, Norway, don't they all produce coal?
No. No. Denmark, having lived in Sweden, no big fossil fuel industry. We rode like on buses that were paid on biofuel. No, there is no significant carbon.
So you're saying that just because that these other countries are less reliant on fossil fuels, that's where the unique job growth is coming from?
Yes, because the fossil fuel industry is declining. I have a question for you.
Sure.
You give an example about increasing innovation. So in these 40 countries that have a carbon tax, give an example of the innovation stemming out of, say, the European Union.
Germany.
Germany's innovation.
Yeah, Germany had that. After their tax, they saw an increase in innovation.
What innovation? What invention?
Research and development in green technology.
What does that result in?
Look, I can't really necessarily tell you the one green technology that was produced, but what I can say is that research and development is a prerequisite to producing technology. Do you not agree with that?
Like
if there was if there's no research and development, can you produce technology?
There's no research and development, you cannot. But this says the volumes of the fact that we've had a carbon tax in 40 different countries, and he cannot say for all this alleged increased innovation, no examples of a new invention being created. That is problematic.
First of all, I can show you Germany, but second of all,
Germany is not an invention. Germany's been created in the 1880s under Bismarck. It's not a new
I would also say that the United States is unique. You say that these other countries were already more reliant on green technology as it was. I would say the same applies for the United States. We are really reliant on fossil fuel. Now, the cost goes up, they're incentivized. In the United States, we don't have a carbon tax. How am I supposed to
So what is going to be created?
It depends on where the research and development goes.
And where I can say it would be. I mean, actually, your question.
You don't think that research and development would go to green energy?
I don't think it would because of the analysis, but it's your turn.
Okay, sure. So when you talk about the trade-off with the EPA, what parts of the EPA policy does your evidence specifically talk about?
Pollution regulations and clean energy.
No, it does not. It talks about carbon regulation.
And that literally in the parenthetical following the words carbon and other pollution.
It says possibly other factors would be rolled back.
Other pollution regulations.
It's
very analogous.
So what is the possibility of those things being rolled back?
I would say that given in the status quo, environmentalists do not make up the majority of Congress. Agree, right?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I would say
what's the composition of Congress right now?
There are more Republicans in Congress than
Democrats,
Democrats, but not
Republicans typically pro-carbon tax.
Okay.
They're not even pro-tax.
Not
pro-carbon tax.
Not every single. The way you garner Republican support is by cutting taxes in other areas, correct?
And cutting regulations.
Well,
what are those other taxes?
I would say income taxes.
Okay, quick thing on income tax. The poor don't pay income taxes.
There are
They're paying higher prices at the pump. They're not
There
getting
are other ways to
benefits.
mitigate poverty than just income tax cuts.
My opponents ready? All my judges and audience. Let's start off with my opponent's first comment. Their first argument is essentially that EPA regulations are going to get traded off with them if these are more efficient. Couple problems. First, they don't even explain to you on a basic level why these EPA regulations are better than a carbon tax. Literally no explanation, no warrant. Don't let them get away with this argument. But secondly, it doesn't make any sense why the industries would roll back non-carbon related regulations in the event that a carbon tax gets passed. Likely that trade-off doesn't make any sense because industries wouldn't want to see like overall air pollution, which kills millions of people worldwide, get rolled back. But ultimately, what the Florida Municipal Electric Association explains is that the Clean Air Act is ill-suited to the carbon regulations specifically, and that those carbon regulations overburden the EPA and prevent it from as successfully pursuing its other life-saving regulations, which they tell you are so critical and so important. They don't even give you any examples of carbon regulations in the status quo, where so far as the Clean Power Act that Obama just tried to pass, which would have been one of the first ones, literally got suspended by the Supreme Court. They have no efficacy, no evidence, no warrants to back up this contention. But let's go through their second contention, which is the bulk of their case on the economy. A couple problems here. First of all, they only look at employment in a vacuum, because what the Congressional Budget Office explains that even if there were declines in some energy industries, these would be offset by increases in employment in other industries whose products are less emission intensive and produce fewer emissions when used. And the reason for this is explained by Masato Sato of the Grantham Research Institute. He explains that low carbon innovations induce larger economic benefits to the dirty technologies they replace because they generate more knowledge in the economy, which can be used by other innovators to further develop new technologies across various sectors of the economy. Ultimately, that's why they give you just a bunch of projections, but don't show you any real areas outside of Australia where we've seen economic harms. James Conca of Forbes explains that Washington State's carbon tax has been overwhelmingly positive on the economy, and they are on track to create jobs. Because moreover, what the National Renewable Energy Laboratory explains is that renewable energy creates 3 times as many jobs in fossil fueling in the long term because of the warrants that I've explained earlier. Moreover, Ralph Martin of the Imperial College of London finds that looking at the UK specifically, no matter how data is cut, there's no statistical negative effect on employment when looking at the real world with the carbon tax. Therefore, they don't have any impacts there. But then they tell you that oil is inelastic, but this is just not true. A meta-analysis of 101 studies examining the United States finds that oil has a significant amount of elasticity. When the price of gas increases, people respond by using less energy, like walking more instead of driving, using less lights in their house, etc. They can't prevent the behavioral changes that are typical to happen in an energy-related economy. But even more so, the Institute for Energy Research tells you that due to political concerns, Congress is likely to execute rebate schemes to low-income companies alongside a carbon tax, which would offset the impact on the poor. They try to preempt this by saying that it's going to lead to a 4% reduction in incomes on net. But A, they don't explain how they know that in advance or what proposal that's based off of, because they can't predict the value of the rebates in the status quo. But B, even if that's true, Adele Morris of the Brookings Institution explains that a price on carbon can trigger higher cost of living increases by government benefits, which are indexed to the consumer price index. What that essentially means is that even if a carbon tax doesn't create an effective rebate, it increases the amount of Social Security and other benefits that people receive. But moreover, Deaton of Think Progress tells you that wealthiest Americans contribute the most to carbon pollution, yet the poor are the ones who suffer the brunt of the impacts. They live near dirty power plants. They're the least equipped to deal with food shocks. Ultimately, a carbon tax is most beneficial to the poor. He finds that we'd be remedying this injustice. But let's go to their impacts. Ultimately, they're all the same. They tell you there's going to be a decrease in environmental policy. But this is categorically untrue. The government doesn't just get rid of its environmental commitments every time that there's an economic decline. They don't show you any place in the world where we've actually seen this happen relative to a carbon tax. Thus, I strongly urge you to affirm the resolution with us.
Start with my opponent's first contention, which talks about oil prices. First, they give you this argument they're cutting oil exports by 20%. That doesn't really matter. They're talking about oil dependence, which comes from oil imports. All their number tells you that they're going to be decreasing oil dependence. They're talking about exports, which is the exact opposite of what they want to be talking about. But then they give you the word, that other big problem with this idea. They don't tell you how much you're actually going to be decreasing demand. For oil. The reason is that according to the IMF, for every 50% increase in the price of oil, you only decrease demand 1.2%. The reason is that oil is such a central factor of our economy that even if you were to increase the price, significant behavioral changes beyond just turning off your lights, as the example, is not actually going to be occurring. But then they give you this impact which talks about violence. But actually, if anything, violence is going to go up because of a carbon tax. Gregory Miller of the University of Oklahoma explained that if we were to decrease our dependence on oil, as my opponent alleged, what happens is these oil-producing nations, particularly in the Middle East, are more likely to see their economies collapse and become unstable and see an increase in terrorism, turning this argument against them. But then they tell you that we're more likely to be intervening abroad. But again, if anything, intervention is actually going to be going up because of a carbon tax. The reason is that according to Max Fisher of the Atlantic, because we buy so much oil, for instance, from the Middle East, yes, they have some leverage over us, but we have a lot more leverage over them because they are dependent on us in order to keep their economy afloat. As a result, we get leverage from them, and as a result, because of that leverage, we can enact policy changes there without actually resorting to an intervention, again, turning this argument against them. Now move on to the next intention, which talks about the green shift. First, they give you this analysis from adopting existing technologies from REM, saying that it's going from 5% to 37% green energy. The problem here is that this assumes elasticity that is significantly too high. It assumes that when you increase the price of oil and increase the price of fossil fuels, you decrease demand significantly much more, 25 times what the literature actually suggests. But the second most important problem here is that when you have this adoption of technology that's replacing coal, it's not going to be green energy technology. Rather, it's going to be natural gas. According to Mason Inman of National Geographic, right now the only technology that is sufficient enough to be able to take the place of coal if the carbon tax were to hasten the demise of coal is natural gas, which is problematic for two reasons. One is the fact that natural gas has significantly higher methane emissions, which are 72 times worse for the climate. But second, and much more importantly, because natural gas infrastructure lasts for on average 55 years, what it does is it locks out renewable energy and makes it delays the time at which renewable energy can actually come into the United States and be adopted on a wide scale. So overall, we're going to be seeing renewable energy, which is the internal link into most of my opponent's case, and most of the rebuttal in the economy, actually goes down because of a carbon tax. Then they talk about how it's going to be leading to more innovation. The fourth problem is something my brother alluded to in Polyprep, which is if this argument was true in the real world, we'd expect to have seen it in the countries that have higher energy prices. As Orrin Cass of Manhattan Institute points out, when you look to Europe, they haven't seen significant inventions. It's not actually going to be occurring in the real world. The argument might be true in theory, but reality flatly contradicts it. And the second big problem is we're actually going to be seeing a decrease in innovation overall because of a carbon tax. The reason is that right now, environmentalists don't make up a high enough composition of Congress in order to actually get it passed. In order to pass the carbon tax, they need to expand their political coalition, which is why Robert says if it's of any substantial size, it would require cuts in these subsidies. The point where the subsidies Mark Burroughs working institutes think are 5 times more effective at stimulating clean energy to actually go directly towards innovation. We see that trade-off is going to lead to a decrease in clean innovation. Then they talk about this impact, which talks about emissions. First, they talk about air pollution, but the problem is this analysis is outdated. As Marlo Lewis of the Competitive Enterprise Institute explains, existing regulations are already reducing particulate matter to the point where it's no longer actually causing significant health problems, to the point where health problems are still an issue in the United States. It's a legacy of past emissions, something that current carbon tax cannot solve. But second, keep in mind, we're going to be seeing particulate matter go up because of a carbon tax. The reason is that according to Greg Ip of the Wall Street Journal, other pollution regulations get cut when you pass a carbon tax in order to expand the political coalition. A carbon tax just reduces carbon emissions, but to the point where we see these regulations are covering a much more broader base of these pollutants of particulate matter. Even if carbon emissions go down because of carbon tax, if particulate matter would therefore go up because you're cutting these regulations, which is another reason to vote for the negative. Thank you. of the new responses to the economy.
Sure.
You tell us that we're going to be seeing the shift to greener sectors, correct?
Yeah.
So is the green sector more or less labor intensive than the fossil fuel sector?
It doesn't matter. First of all, I would argue it's more labor intensive. Why? Because you're going to say that it has less sectors, right? Because they have oil fewer sectors, because there are refineries for oil and et cetera, right?
That's not my only reason.
Okay. But ultimately, even if that's not your only reason, like manufacturing for green technologies often creates more people on hand. Like it's very
Where do
difficult
they
to build.
manufacture these green technologies?
Often in the United States.
Often? How often?
I don't know. Do you have a number?
Yes.
Sure.
For instance, solar production. We have 20 gigawatts of solar production in the United States right now.
Okay.
Only 1 gigawatt is actually from solar panels produced in the United States. That means 95% of it is being produced abroad. You might see construction of solar panels and wind turbines. Those construction jobs are not in the U.S.
Even if that's true, that's not the significant warrant for why we say that green technology is better. Because what we explain is that when you invest more into research and development for green technology, that translates into knowledge spillovers which benefit all industries.
What industry, like how would the food industry benefit from knowledge spillovers?
I mean, it's the same way, like when we go into space, we often find things that help us
So give me an example of something that would help these other sectors.
I can't tell you technology that hasn't been come up with
Give me a
yet.
broader category of technology.
I don't know, like helping figure out like solutions in wind turbines might improve the wheels on cars. Like, do you want me to spitball like invention? You're asking me to come up with Sam, this is really unfair. Okay, you're asking me to come up with technology that hasn't been invented yet.
I'm asking you to come up with a broader classification because we've had carbon tax.
Okay.
Your partner told us the carbon tax is in 40 countries.
Okay.
I'd expect to have seen the results.
Okay, we see the results in every single country that's had a carbon tax.
How
We've
are
seen
the
a decrease in emissions.
How are the
every
wheels
single
different
one.
on German cars than American cars?
I'm not sure, but actually the German car industry is a lot more productive than the
In like luxury cars like BMW, actually anything have lower gas standards than you see in American cars.
So what? They're still better cars. I think you're being a little bit abusive to us when you're coming here and asking me like, oh, come up with some invention that hasn't been invented yet.
I'm not asking you to come up with an invention. I want to see stuff that has been invented yet, because you tell us carbon tax have been implemented.
It does, even if I don't have the specific examples, every place where we've had a carbon tax in place, there's been a decrease in emissions.
That correlation, because the United States has seen a 12.7% decrease in emissions since 2007.
Okay.
But we didn't have a carbon tax.
Okay. Well, in Australia, they were increasing, but saw a relative decrease in how much they were increasing before.
Let's start off with our second contention. He says that we assume high elasticity, but what Harrison says in his rebuttal is that elasticity is in fact higher than Will and Sam would like you to believe, because most people live in urban areas, so when the tax on carbon makes oil prices higher, that means that they can walk or take public transportation. But second, he says that you replace with natural gas. Here's a few reasons why that would be a good thing. Housefather finds that he said, Sam says in rebuttal that methane is only bad, but the problem is that Housefather finds that methane doesn't leak very often. In fact, only a 1% rate, which ultimately leads Lazarus to find that natural gas produces half the emissions that coal plants do. Next, he talks about the bridge to natural gas. But policymakers know that this is actually a potential to happen, and so they combine it with things like wind turbines to actually serve as a bridge to greener technology. He asks, furthermore, for examples of innovations that have been created. But according to The Guardian, a half to a fourth of all innovation has been created by spikes in energy prices. We are the ones looking into that when we show increases in energy prices because of a carbon tax. Finally, he talks about a cut in subsidies, but that is an independent reason to affirm the resolution, because The Guardian finds that subsidies are incredibly bad because they reduce incentives for green tech firms to actually be efficient, because the government is just giving them money anyway. In fact, they find that every 1 watt of green energy produced with subsidies loses 5 jobs because of that. The way to wean them off of that is by voting for the affirmative. They say that you would cut subsidies, and that's a great thing. But now let's go to some more trade-offs. First of all, we tell you that the only thing that would be being rolled back are the carbon initiatives taken by the EPA, which tremendously over-regulate the burden that they have to do other things, which Harrison says save lives. But if you want to look to jobs, the best example would be Washington State, in the United States, where we implemented a carbon tax and there were absolutely 0 job loss. But even so, we say that when you increase investments in green technology, regardless of how much innovation or inventions it comes up with, it creates 3 times the amount of jobs, and that's always a good thing. That's always better for the economy.
We want to talk about an easy way to vote con. That's the terms we put on our contention about security. When we say that quickly cutting off the supply, going to with the Saudi Arabia, you destabilize those countries in the Middle East, increasing terrorism, increasing violence. If you want to threat to American lives, there's no easier place to vote con. Then let's just talk about terms going on to the environment. They misunderstand the argument with the natural gas laws. They say that methane doesn't leak. That's based on an underestimation based on EPA numbers. What the Environmental Justice Network said is that methane leakage are always worse than coal, and as a result of the leakage, it is an on-net harm to the environment. They're misunderstanding the second implication. That is to say, because you're increasing the natural gas, it crowds out investment going into the green sectors that my opponents say are so important. Then, the second term we quote is about undermining clean subsidies. They say that you're reducing the incentive to actually innovate. No, that's not true, because there's always the incentive to innovate, because they have to outcompete their own competitors. The major barrier right now to innovation is the lack of capital. Cutting subsidies undermines that. Gets rid of this capital. That's why we're saying these subsidies are 5 times higher. The third reason why the environment gets worse is cuts in regulations. They say, why is the EPA better? Why are they cutting non-carbon regulations? But Greg April of the Wall Street Journal said the only way that they can expand the coalition, they have to cut things just perceived as having overlapping mandate. That means regulations on sulfur. That means regulations on methane, the things that are actually your health. They say this is overburdening the EPA. Imposing a carbon tax would overburden the EPA a whole lot more than these other regulations. This is why they give, as for an example, the World Bank goes to a global announcement that the trade-offs result in a net harm to the environment. Then let's discuss the idea of the economy. They say they're creating jobs in other sectors. We're going to forward 3 reasons why this is true. 1, the green energy sector is less labor intensive. B, the jobs are all going to skilled workers. And C, as Sam established in Crossfire, the jobs that are being created in China, not in the United States. They say Washington State is a good example. There is no fossil fuel industry in Washington State. It is not analogous. Then they say 3 times the jobs being created. That's because the jobs have already been created in fossil fuels. We say the jobs are being lost. They say you can rebate it back to the poor. The Free said even if you rebate it, it's a 4% reduction in income. We outweigh because we say 840,000 more people go into poverty, resulting in 15,000 extra deaths. That is the strongest link into American lives any team had on any side presented in this debate.
Tell me that there's no fossil fuel energy in Washington.
Absolutely. Should we go there?
Yeah, that was the part. Yeah, sorry. Didn't have said that. Everyone ready? So in summary, you tell me that there's no fossil fuel industry in Washington State.
I think one vis-a-vis the United States.
So you're telling me that prior to carbon tax, Washington State produced the majority of its energy with renewables?
Oh, no, misunderstand. That's not what it means not having a fossil fuel industry means.
Okay.
What you take it to mean is that they don't use natural gas or coal for their power plants.
Okay.
But a fossil fuel industry means that there is an extraction. This is almost all the coal in the United States comes from the Powder River Basin in Wyoming, and the remaining sector comes from Appalachia. So it's not in Washington State. May I ask you a question, sir?
Sure, if you'd like.
So when you talk about specifically how you create triple that leakage methane, right? You should base that EPA estimates.
Actually, no. One part of it is coming off of EPA estimates, but still, other recent studies, according to this analysis, have produced higher leakage rates, but still only between 1.8 and 4%.
Okay, so my question is, how do they conduct those studies?
How do they conduct those studies?
Yes, they just look at the amount of methane that's
Do they
extracted
look?
and see how much of it leaks.
How do they check how much it is, though?
How do they check how much leaks? They use something probably a similar technology to carbon capture and sequestration, where they put something in.
Carbon capture and sequestration is correct.
Okay.
We're not you're asking us to be scientists, which we're not. I mean, I don't understand what's
Because
the issue with
the
this
reason why I have an issue is I do know how these studies work.
Okay.
So the idea is that what they do is they look at specific extraction sites where they extract natural gas, for instance, at a specific site within the Marcellus Shale, right, in Pennsylvania. The reason why that's an issue is because that only takes into account, for instance, how much they're flaring off when they extract it from the shale rock, right? Because you have the flares, because you have the natural gas,
flare offs that account for the leaks.
That's some of it, but you also have a leaks in the transportation and when it actually turns into power. Because there are a lot more leaks elsewhere, and that's why you will find that it's quote, natural gas quote, always worse than coal.
Okay, that's not actually true, because you just tell me that they only look at these certain flare-ups, but these flare-ups account for the majority of how much methane actually leaks.
How much of leaks comes from transportation?
I would think the overall net effect is such, I believe it's close to 5 to 7%, which sounds small, so you consider the fact that methane is 72 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So the net effect
Our analysis
is always worse than
our analysis actually looks at the overall leakage rates and finds it would have to be 11.5% to surpass the value of coal. If you are not proving that, then you are not proving any impact.
Yes, we are, because there are two reasons. One is the fact that you have to look abroad, you have to see 11.5% at the extraction site, not overall. The second is the fact, this is really important, is that methane is the natural gas mainly because of the lockout effect.
If you can prove that, we'll respond to that, but if you can prove overall that in the production process leakage rates are 11% or higher, then we grant you the impact. That includes transportation and
I want to emphasize one last thing with the remaining time. Is that the biggest carbon natural gas is not just leakage, it's how increased the tax dependency that crowds have invested in renewable energy that you save so much.
And we respond to that. On EPA regulations. We say that you're overburdening the EPA with greenhouse gas regulations. They say there's a couple responses. They say, A, you're going to cut other things because there's overlap between them. But then he lists off a bunch of other gases which aren't carbon. That's the entire point. There is no overlap between carbon dioxide and between sulfur, etc. Do not let them make a new response to this in Final Focus, because that would be unfair to me. At the end of the day, what we show you is that the EPA cannot conduct its other regulatory activities in the event that we see these carbon standards that they're talking about. That outweighs everything else for a couple reasons. A, air pollution most directly affects lives more than anything else that they talk about. They talk about security and terrorism going up. Even if you accept those impacts, A, those are mostly abroad. Very few Americans die every year from terrorism from the Middle East. But moreover, let's go into the next big point, which is going to be on the economy. A couple things that get dropped. A is that oil actually is elastic, because essentially consumers can change their behavior of products. That's why in every single country we've seen a decrease in carbon emissions when we've seen an implementation of a carbon tax. Overall, we tell you that there's a one-fourth to one-half of all green energy innovation has come from the increase in energy prices. Their only remaining response to this is essentially that methane creates a natural gas lock-in, but they drop it what Eitan tells you in summary, which is that essentially the policies are targeted with a carbon tax to ensure that we don't see this natural gas lock-in. Moreover, they don't give you any examples of where this has actually happened. At the end of the day, a couple of impacts that you can extend. A is that the subsidies that we're trading off with are inefficient, which they don't respond to, which means that there's going to be an increase in jobs overall. B, that Washington State saw more jobs. They tell you essentially that Washington State didn't have a fossil fuel industry, but they still consumed energy, which means all of their warrants should still apply because the energy prices are passed on to consumers according to them. But we tell you that green innovation creates more jobs in the long run, which links right into their own impact of lives, which is based on poverty and economic harms. Thus, on all fronts of the debate, we're winning the round.
We should be looking to American lives first. The main place and the easiest place for you to vote in this round is going to be off this oil-dependent firm that we put on the first contention. From Bill Evans, who claims that if you reduce our oil dependence, what happens is you destabilize the Middle Eastern nations, and from Matt Fisher, who claims that we don't have to intervene because we have influence in other ways. They say that very few people die from terrorism, but our impact doesn't just come from increasing terrorism, it also comes from the fact that we no longer have to intervene. This is the cleanest and easiest link into lives in today's round, and should be more than enough for you to negate. But now let's talk about the issue that they talk a lot about, which is this idea of the environment. There's a dispute over how high the elasticity is. But when they tell you that elasticity is pretty high, they give you examples of things like turning off the light, which doesn't significantly affect emission. When we look at the bigger picture, we see that it is largely inelastic. Then we talk about this idea of shifting to natural gas. And the reason why this is really important is because not only do we have these methane emissions, but it also locks out and delays the introduction of renewable energy. They say these policies are going to be targeted to avoid this, without giving you any example of how that's true. The reason why they don't give you an example is it's simply not true. These policies aren't targeted. Then they say there's no examples of where this is true, ignoring the fact that no other country has natural gas reserves as the United States does. This is really important because according to the natural gas laws, not only leads to increasing overall emissions, we're going to be seeing delays the introduction of renewable energy, turning their internal linkage to the environment and into their linkage to the economy. But the other way it's going to be harming the environment is this trade-off with regulations. When they tell you it's going to be overburdening the EPA, they ignore, as Will points out, that a carbon tax is much more expensive, would overburden the EPA even more. And they ignore from it, who says that very clearly it's other pollution regulations on other emittents that's going to be traded off. So that's going to be another harm reason why the environment flows to our side. Now let's go to the more important issue, which is the idea of the economy, that by raising energy prices, you'll harm the economic growth. They say, the example from Washington State, which is from 2015, so it's too soon to actually draw conclusions. Then they talk about how it's going to be linked to free jobs, ignoring that A, the green sector is a lot less labor intensive, so you end up seeing a net decrease in jobs. The jobs that are created are only in the skilled sector, and third,
2/3 of jobs of those skilled tech jobs are largely occurring in China, so we still see that result. To the point where this is the strongest impact of lives, because you have pushing people to poverty, you decrease their access to healthcare, American lives are at risk because of a carbon tax, and that's why I want you to engage. Thank you.
So my decision making was very step by step. The first thing that I did is I watched 2 debates. I watched the increase in jobs, and I watched the green energy, sum of green energy investment, because I hear contradictory evidence. And like I asked for at the beginning, I never hear analysis as to why one evidence or one piece of evidence is better than the other one. So that ends up hurting Con because they, in my opinion, they come down pretty heavily on the green sector job loss, that it's less labor intensive. So that kind of loses them some points for me. I also here then go down into, I give pro the lives debate because of air pollution, which remains after natural gas gets wiped. And that's pretty substantial. And then, so for me, it came down to investment in green energy because I was seeing pro's response showing this have to afford investment comes when energy prices are high, in addition to the evidence that they give you right out of their case, saying that the patents increase when green energy, blah, 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 all of this stuff. So I end up voting on green energy, which I believe pro responds to sufficiently and kind of minimizes Con's harms.
First of all, I just want to congratulate everyone for making semifinals here in such a competitive tournament. I saw the round a little bit differently. First of all, I did buy the NAICS framework that we should look at most of the likely outcomes on the table. With that in mind, I bought their evidence also that says that the underfunded EPA can't both implement this price tax increase and then also implement its pre-existing regulations. I took away a little bit of the absolvency of the particular matter because of how the NEG was able to show that in the long run this probably wouldn't be as tightly regulated in the future. I also didn't think the app had enough of an economic argument for how money gets back to the poor, since the NEG read that 4% of income is going to fall even with the rebate at the end. The green tech, I also bought the point that some innovation is going to exist in a capitalist economy regardless, so I think that even their long-term green tech benefits are not able to offset the short-term harms accruing due to the loss in the particular regulation, and also due to the harms on the poor from that reduction, and that's why I voted for the NEG.
It's a little like listening to Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, right? Because on the one hand, we've got the pro and kind of hope and change and green, and on the economy, we've got tell me exactly what you mean by technology and what on earth has happened in Germany. And a little bit for me in analyzing the round, it starts with, I thought that those questions on Crossfire were effective at first. And then as I thought more and listened and got the final focus, felt a little bit like was misdirection, which is sometimes a very effective argumentative technique. But at the end of the day, the evidence about green energy and the possibility of innovation and the need for innovation, I think, is established clearly across the flow and emphasized very nicely in the final focus. I thought the economic arguments cut both ways, and there wasn't a clean answer. You see my RFP, you're going to see that I worry about poverty, and that was the one place that leaned a little bit con. So ultimately, what happens? You weigh green energy and the possibility there, and what we're facing as a consequence against these economic pieces. And neither of you took each other's weighing on closely enough, so you let me do it. And and I'll take what the pro did in vital focus, and that's the way I voted. But it was a really wonderful round. Thank you guys very much.
I'm going to stand on this side. I went with the con, and I think we had a good turn of the destabilization of the Middle Eastern countries. I like that. And I also went with the economic hardship, second and third subpoints. You're hurting the poor. That didn't get well addressed by the pro. And I think you're in a bad economy. Those programs are not going to be funded. So that's my one.
It was a nail biter for me, but I voted for the pro based on the green technology and also the